The American President Donald Trump welcomed the EU leaders to the White House as he held talks with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The high-level discussions brought together the key European stakeholders, including the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, the French President Emmanuel Macron, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, the Chief of NATO Mark Rutte, and the President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. Now, the leaders were seated around a large table and took turns addressing Donald Trump directly. Now, the American President Donald Trump opened the meeting saying that the objective was to see if we can get it finished and put this to sleep, signaling his desire to move the world towards closure in the Ukraine war in the coming weeks.
But I believe a peace agreement at the end of all of this is something that's very attainable, and it can be done in the near future. With all of the wars that I got involved in, we only have this one left.
Now, during the talks, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called for a ceasefire in Ukraine before there is the next trilateral meeting, contradicting the American President Donald Trump's call to work for a peace deal instead of a ceasefire with Russia.
Steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday. But now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next meeting on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that.
Meanwhile, the French President Emmanuel Macron called for a four-way meeting, including the Europeans, in response to the US President Donald Trump's hopes of bringing together the Ukrainian and the Russian presidents.
I just have to say here, everybody around this table is in favor of peace. And we work very hard, and we've worked very hard during the past few years to have a peace which is a robust and long-standing peace. This is why the idea of a trilateral meeting is very important, because this is the only way to fix it. And by the way, I think as a follow-up, we would need probably a quadrilateral meeting, because when we speak about security guarantees, we speak about the whole security of the European continent. And this is why we are all united here with Ukraine on this matter.
All right, joining us in the broadcast, we've got Ambassador Joachim Bittlich, who's a former German ambassador to NATO and also a former European diplomatic and security advisor to the former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and is joining us live from Normandy in France. Ambassador Bittlich, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. So we saw this pretty extraordinary meeting of all European leaders with the American President Donald Trump. In your assessment, what is the key takeaway from this meeting? Is this effectively now an agreement amongst the Americans and the European powers that the way to peace is ahead of them?
Well, dear Mohamed Saleh, difficult to give now at this very moment a clear view on this summit, because they are still discussing internally, the 7 European leaders and Donald Trump. And therefore, and they touch upon key questions. And please be aware of one question. If anyone agrees now to a territorial ceiling towards the Russians of Ukraine, 20% only, okay. This would be a real precedent in Europe for the first time after World War II, that there is a border changing by force in Europe, and this with agreement of different forces. Therefore, please be aware of this real precedent for the future of European security. And therefore, the Europeans have been, let's say, waking up to some extent by Trump's words about security guarantees and by an American implication insofar. Whatever does this mean if the Russians agree to it? I've still some doubts, because in the past the Russians did not accept any NATO or Western European force in order to control a ceasefire, nor any American implication insofar, not even American troops. And therefore, the question is what's really behind.
Right.
What does it mean? What does it mean with Article 5, so-called Article 5 guarantee? Let's see. And please, all this security, territory, and the question recognition by the Ukrainians, by force now. And I think we have all the important questions for the moment still open.
Right.
And therefore, well, I refuse to tell people now, well, the Europeans are in a mess, or it's a trap to the Europeans we are now in.
Right.
Let's wait and see the real outcome. I'm sure there will be a trilateral meeting afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
There will be one. And I think I follow there, Chancellor Merz, a ceasefire is a necessary step in between towards a real peace agreement. It's clear. I can't imagine, let's say, such a meeting without at least a certain ceasefire at the end. And perhaps even they are speaking about a four-way summit, including the Europeans. Well, it's future. It may be something we could reach. We have been talking about 30 years ago with the Russians to integrate Russia more into, let's say, in a European permanent consultation on questions of peace. Yes, but this we are far away from such real a way out of this conflict.
Right. Instead of being an optimist, I think you're being a realist in suggesting that there is a lot of water that still needs to flow under the bridge. But I want you to weigh in on one very crucial aspect, which the American president also indicated, that he's open to sending American soldiers as part of security guarantees for Ukraine. If NATO troops are not acceptable to the Russians near their frontier, why does the American president think that American troops on Ukrainian soil can come and ensure a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, his idea is not a NATO force, but a bilateral force agreed between Russians and Americans, including Ukrainians. Even for Ukrainians, it's perhaps more important to see Americans on this borderline instead of perhaps forces, let's say, from India or from other third countries. Perhaps more important to reassure them. Because for the Ukrainians, I think they would have accepted at the end of the day the end of Ukrainians part of the Crimea. Yes, easier. But the Donbas east of Ukraine, to accept this will be extremely difficult to the Ukrainians. What's shocking for me at the end of the day is when I look at the map you are showing now, when I look at the situation as it is, we could have got till 2020-21 a peace agreement with a neutral Ukraine, with, let's say, a specific solution for the Crimea under Russian auspices, a more, let's say, federal Ukraine. We could have got a peace solution without a Russian invasion.
Right.
This is the precedent for Europe as a whole, where Europe is really afraid of a situation that Ukraine could be only a first step towards others.